I call Eugenie Sage.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Pleased to take a call on the Social Security Extension of Young Persons Services and Remedial Matters Bill on behalf of my colleague Jan Logie. But the Green Party won't be supporting this bill, largely because of the quite paternalistic attitude that it takes to young people. When this parliament has debated the drinking age in the past, the argument was made and it was accepted that if you are old enough to be sent to war, to get married, to have children, and then you should be allowed to drink. But it seems inconsistent then that if you're allowed to do all of those things, that with parents under 20, the state sees itself as being able to impose significant obligations on those young people in order to access social security. So because of the paternalistic approach, we are not supporting the bill. So the bill amends the Social Security Act, and its main purpose is to extend the ability to access the youth service provisions to all 19-year-old beneficiaries with children and to 18 and 19-year-old beneficiaries without children who are considered at significant risk of long-term dependency. But these youth services involve significantly more social obligations and more social control by government over young people. And some of the obligations, for example, we certainly support young people having access to education and the wraparound service that's provided there. But some of the other obligations include attending regular meetings with a provider to discuss activities, spending and budgeting, having key bills paid directly out of the benefit, using a payment card and being restricted to $50 a week in cash unless the young person can prove that they deserve more. And as Carmel Sepuloni has noted, there's a two-tier system in relation to young parents because the obligations on young parents to return to full-time education, training or work are much harsher than they are on adults over 20 who are receiving a benefit. And so, in our view, these provisions in the bill are quite discriminatory on the basis of both age and family status. They take a patronising approach to the provision of social security to young adults, and the assumption that the government seems to be making is that young people are incapable of managing their own financial and personal affairs. So while one of the requirements on young parents is that they enrol their child with a primary health organisation, that's obviously something that should be encouraged when it's being encouraged in a supportive environment. But when such decisions are tied to the loss of benefit income or the potential loss of benefit income, we don't think that those obligations are appropriate to put on 18 and 19-year-olds because it's creating the basis for quite a punitive regime rather than a constructive and supportive one. And it's also suggesting that young people from 18 to 20 aren't able to take important life decisions themselves without reporting to someone else. It's suggesting that they sit around, that they're unfocused without the threat of sanctions. And so that paternalism is at the heart of our objection to this bill. So we certainly in the Green Party want to support young people who are disadvantaged. We want them to have the same opportunities as others, but we don't think the way this bill goes about it, by restricting life choices, removing control over key life decisions, is in any way desirable for 18 and 19-year-olds. They are adults, and it is patronising for the state to actually seek to control their decisions in the way this bill does. And certainly with the youth services concept, everybody's talked about it as wraparound services, and there have been some good stories that have been reported back around the country, but we've also heard some stories that worry us. We've been told of dairy owners who are charging young people $100 to get $50 cash on their payment cards. We've been told of young parents in teen schools who believe that they are potentially in breach of their obligations if they tend to their children and settle them while they are in class. And so we've been also told of parents having their income sanctioned for spending too long away from their course to attend a tangi. So that's the sort of paternalism, those are the sort of examples that we're concerned about. And we've also got quite serious concerns about forcing single young people up to the age of 20 into a model with quite onerous accountability based on the state's identification of them as at-risk young people. And that's being done, as the regulatory impact statement makes clear, using a behind-the-scenes formula. And it's likely to mean that some young people will be identified as being at risk, and that they could have a friend that's the same age in the same circumstances, but they've got a slightly different profile, so they get dealt with by work and income, while the other one gets directed towards youth services. So, Mr Speaker, this sort of situation where you get assessments being made by a state agency of people and then put into separate streams and receiving different services based on the state's assessment is quite risky in terms of alienating people from government processes, and it's at risk too of arbitrary and unfair decision making. We don't want a system where people feel that they are being stigmatised, that they're being labelled, and that potentially they become quite resentful and mistrusting of the government. And when you look at the regulatory impact statement, the Minister says it's unbelievable. But the RIS says, and I quote, that it makes a number of distinctions based on age, family status and other risk factors. That leads to 18 and 19-year-olds who are identified as being at risk of long-term benefit dependency being treated quite differently from 18 and 19-year-olds who are not considered at risk. The Minister says that's right, but she cannot see that this is a huge infringement on human rights by having the state determine which category you fall into and therefore which services you should have access to. And one of the key principles in the RIS is also that the liability for the Crown to have to pay for future welfare services for these people is a major determinant in the government's decision-making around the bill. So it seems to be based on the Crown or the government saving itself money in future rather than actually delivering an embracing social security system. So we want to support human dignity, human rights, and not have this categorisation process which has the state intervening to cut across people's ability to make decisions about their future when they are aged over 18 and when elsewhere they're considered an adult in terms of being able to drink, to go to war, to get married, but not according to MSD and its categorisation. Because in the Green Party, we want jobs for everyone, and we're not about beneficiary bashing the way this government is. Making it harder for people to live on a benefit won't somehow magically create jobs for them to move into. The welfare deforms in this bill will increase inequality and it will make it harder for people to live on a benefit. That's going to compound the challenges that are faced by people who are unemployed, by disengaged young people, and it will undermine the ability of parents to take care of their children. So we cannot support this bill, because it's the government's thinking that if you make it hard enough and tough enough for beneficiaries, if you introduce enough work tests, and if you threaten them with enough sanctions, that somehow jobs will magically appear that they can move into. We know, and the government knows, that it doesn't actually work like that in the real world. Officials have told the government that, but the only response that they've developed in this bill seems to be a paternalistic one where the state is making critical life decisions on behalf of people aged 18 and 19 who are old enough to make those decisions for themselves. So, Mr Speaker, we know that there are good providers, but we also know in terms of youth services that there are some problems that have arisen and that we don't want to see the privatisation of social security that this bill is extending. That's another of the reasons that the Green Party is opposing the bill. Thank you.